Thanks for joining us, Steve. It's so great to have you here today, joining us all the way from Switzerland.
Terrific. My afternoon.
That's right. I'm sorry. You're right. I said good morning and it's afternoon for you. So we're so glad to have you here with us and back in Douglas County virtually. We've had you here in Douglas County a couple of times before and just so enjoy your thinking. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. A great time on both visits, and a large number of people had a chance to work with there.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some of the conversation today. So obviously we've been talking before the show started about the pandemic and just where we're at lately. Tell me, as an educator and a supporter of educators, what can we do right now to best support each other through this pandemic? I know we're coming back to school after Christmas and things will look a little bit different. And we're talking about how do we best support each other through this ongoing pandemic?
For me, this is a time for learning. That's what I'm encouraging everybody to have as a focus. And if I could personalize it, I'm at the age where retiring would make sense. I think the next 3 to 5 years in education could be so dramatic that I actually can't stand the thought that I would be standing on the sideline watching it happen. So I've actually jumped in deeper in studying and learning, because I think there's such great potential. Certainly building all the social emotional skills and building resilience for everyone. So this is an increased time of learning for educators, for students, for parents. If we all look at what can we learn during this time and how will we use that learning, that becomes the crucial element.
That's so true. I often say, it's a terrible time for sure, but at the same time, there are many silver linings that are coming from this. One of them being this new learning. And as you mentioned, the resilience. I've listened to your podcast. You mentioned that you do several podcasts a week. And I know that you have recently touched on the subject of resilience, both in our teachers and students. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you see resilience coming through in this time?
As I researched this, I came across a continuum that talked about us moving from fear in the crisis to learning in the crisis to growth. And the key in moving from fear into learning and into growth, from my vantage point, is reflection. I share personally, a nice discovery for me was that when the lockdowns occurred here in Europe, the one thing Switzerland didn't lock down was the forest. So as part of the culture, you're encouraged to be out in nature. And so I built a walk into my lockdown days, and I started my walk as for exercise, but realized it became my reflection time.
That's excellent. How do we encourage that?
Well, that's where I think the coaching piece falls in now. I think it's where the communication piece falls in. It's in teachers' personal conversations with kids. It's in our conversations with parents. The need to become conscious. So when I'm conscious of what my emotions are, when I'm conscious of all the things that are going through my head that I can't do, and once I become conscious of it, I can shift to what I can do and begin to move to a sense of learning.
In the pandemic and going remote and changing the way that our learning environment looks like, we didn't just forget everything that goes into good teaching. Everybody's still fantastic teachers. So if you put aside the things that are challenging and think about the things that you can do, that's a fantastic reflection and a great starting place to really think about that resilience. I love that.
So from the work that I did there in your district when I was there, that I have this big focus on student learning production behaviors. It's what the kids do that causes learning. So teachers don't cause student achievement, students cause student achievement. But because the learners are engaged in the learning production behaviors. So the job of the task of the teacher is to figure out how I get those behaviors. So when you look at having to go virtual or having to go hybrid, a teacher's still asking the same question. So it's a different strategy I need to use in order to get that behavior from the one I would have been using in my classroom. My own discovery during this time was the critical role that personalization plays. Right when COVID hit, I was scheduled to go to Bangkok to do a 4-day training on coaching skills for people from the Near East, South Asia international schools. And so, of course, it got canceled. And they said, Steve, we'll have you come in October instead. And so then they quickly canceled October. And they said, Steve, see what else you could design for us to start engaging people in this learning. I designed a program that I called personalized coaching. And it was built around a set of online modules that facilitated working people through the skills. But I added to it an initial phone call interview up front with each participant, and then 3 phone calls during it. When we got to the end, I'm convinced that people learned more than had we spent the 4 days together in Bangkok. And part of that learning was they took a personalized approach because of those interactions. So I've changed. I'm on 3 or 4 projects right now that have all built in personal interviews with the people I'm training before I get started. My company's working on a series of online PDs for teachers, and we're building in a structure where teachers can raise something personal that they want to have happen during the course. And we'll arrange so that the person facilitating their learning is constantly having that pop up on the screen in front of them, and they're bringing people back to it. So asking and listening straight across the board, whether we're talking parents, administrators, students, teachers,
Right.
I really think that's where we need to be.
I'm just trying to think about how that plays out in the everyday classroom, whether it is remote or hybrid. And I hear you. It's about the way that we listen and talk to everybody that's involved, whether it's a teacher that we're coaching or whether it's a parent that we're working with. But how does it play out in the classroom? How do you see that happen?
Yeah, I think it gets designed in.
Okay.
So how does a teacher decide that giving up a chunk of instructional time to meet with kids one-on-one is critical and important?
Right. Right.
And so bring us all back to the classroom. How do I want to build that into what my classroom begins to look like? If I'm working at a high school and I have 150 kids, well, how do we work together with advisories? Every kid is getting this in-depth conversation with a teacher who's now responsible to assist all the teachers who are working with that student. I think the same is going to be true of our communications with parents.
Mm-hmm.
My finding is teachers and parents have done a ton more communication during this time than they normally did.
Right.
Should that go away? I've worked with several schools that made a discovery. There's not going to be any more parent conference days. They found out Zoom conferences were much more productive than that afternoon that we sent the kids home early and forced the parents to squeeze into these little meetings.
Yeah. I think if I asked our schools that, they may have already come to that realization, but I appreciate you pointing that out too. It's fantastic.
I just got off the phone, actually just got off the Zoom with a district level person talking about administrators who are doing observations in teachers' virtual classrooms now. And they're sending them notes, and the notes aren't going over well. So my conversation back is, don't send notes. It's a call to the person. It can be a 10-minute call. If you're writing a good note, it's going to take you 10 minutes to write the note.
Mm-hmm.
But to get the teacher on the phone and to ask the teacher, in that time that I was in there today, what did you see that you felt best about in the way the students were engaged in learning?
Mm-hmm.
And what was one spot where you would like to have seen it go a step deeper than it went? A minute conversation that's going to go further than anything I'm going to send out to you.
I totally agree. And I remember from when you visited our district previously, that same advice about asking what is the one thing that you would want to see different with the student behavior or the student learning? And you're always focused on that student outcome, which I think is a great reminder as we talk today. And it's, as we said, no different in this environment as well. That's great advice. Follow up with that phone call.
The question I frequently put in front of teachers is, what did you learn during the class today? A teacher should be learning something from that time.
Yeah.
So my question back to the administrators who are visiting teachers' classrooms is, what did you learn? My question to the principal is, when you're doing walkthroughs, what did you learn from the walkthroughs? What do you imagine you'll do based on what you've learned? So it all comes back to our real focus is on everybody learning, which means increased reflection. Whoever wants to increase the learning, it works to increase the reflection.
Yep, I was just going to tie it back to that. Yes, exactly what you said at the beginning, the reflection and the personalization, it all ties back together. So let's talk a little bit about student engagement and student ownership and agency. That's a primary place that we see struggle this year, whether it's in a hybrid environment or remote environment. And as we have students coming back to school, I imagine that you're going to say it's still around that personalization and reflection, but I want to ask the question.
But I'll add one more piece to it, and
Okay.
that is the learning production behaviors.
Okay.
So for a student to take ownership, the student has to know what the learning production behaviors are.
Okay.
So my favorite example that I'd love to use, I was in a school that was focused on improving student writing across the board.
Mhm.
And I met with this student, I think he was 3rd or 4th grade, and he showed me his writing folder. And I said to him, do you have a goal in writing? And he said, yeah, my goal is to move my score from 2.5 to 3.0.
Mhm.
And I said, man, that's terrific. I said, what will that take? And he said, it's going to take having fewer punctuation mistakes and greater variety in my vocabulary. I said, oh, that's really cool. I said, what will you do to make that happen? And he looked at me and said, I have no idea. Okay, so it's pretty cool. He had a goal. He
Right.
knew what it would look like when he achieved the goal,
Right?
but he had absolutely no idea what he could do to make that happen.
Wow.
And so I said to him, I said, well, you need some learning production behaviors. And he said, what's that? I said, well, I'm going to give you one. Ask your teacher for a list of all the places commas are used and put it inside your writing folder. And when you finish your draft, get that list out and look at the first place commas are used. Do you have any of those? Look at the second place. And I'm going to make you a bet. If you do that every draft for the next month, you're going to start putting commas in the right place. My other favorite example is I'm living in Switzerland. I'm working to learn German.
Oh my gosh.
And I had 3 years of German in high school, 2 years in college, and I don't speak any German. So we've got a problem. But I'm working to learn on Duolingo on my phone. And Duolingo doesn't teach.
Right.
All they do is give you learning production behaviors. They give you the activities that engage you in the behaviors that would cause you to learn. And then they build in all kind of motivational strategies.
Right.
And it's really cool because I'm going into my 3rd year now. I'm 800 days streak of having done at least a 15-minute lesson every day for 800 days, and usually more than my 15 minutes. But to watch what they've learned, to strategies to engage me in those behaviors. The piece they just added, they keep track of my mistakes and they give me practice opportunities to pick exercises that have my past mistakes in it. And they award double points, which you can't cash in for anything, okay? But they award double points if you do a practice of your previous mistakes. They encourage and motivate you to engage in what is a very good learning production behavior. Spend time going back over ones that you missed for repetition and practice.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. What can you say to us in German? Can you give us some advice for?
I can't give you any advice, but I can say guten Tag, good day, guten Morgen, good morning, and gute Nacht. Okay, so we got you covered in all the greetings.
I bet that if you're not put on the spot, that you would be able to engage in some conversation there. Well, Steve, I know that we only have a short time together today, but before we sign off today, going back to the advice, what advice would you give our teachers just as the one walk away that they have this year? What would you tell them?
Yeah, so I've hit the big word, which is continued learning.
Right.
And the one I would tie to that is seek feedback.
Okay.
Seek feedback constantly. The one thing I saw happening well as we went into this is that teachers sought feedback from students more than they previously had.
Right.
Teachers sought feedback from parents more than they previously had. My push now is seeking that feedback from your colleagues. You're making a 10-minute video to provide some direct instruction to your students. The idea of putting that video out in front of 3 or 4 of your colleagues and getting input assist you in sharpening your next one. And I hope what we'll do is increase our collegiality that way, so that we'll also start making those video clips available to each other. If a student was confused after my presentation, he can log on and check in with 3 of my colleagues who have done a video on the same topic. I just think learning and feedback would be the 2 that I'd put out there.
I love that, and it ties back to collective efficacy for our teachers, and even lends itself to the PLC conversation as well. So fantastic advice. Anything that you would like to leave us with, Steve?
My congratulations to educators who have just responded tremendously from this happening overnight to them.
Right.
Especially at this time right now, encourage people to look at getting better at what you're doing day by day by day. When the vaccines worked its way through and the school doors have opened back up, I think there's so many things that people will bring back to their classrooms that are going to lead to increased student success and result, which is why everybody's in this.
Right. It was so good to have you here with us today. So glad that you could take time out of your schedule, and we're jealous of where you are. So enjoy for us.